He returned from war missing a leg and everything he loved, then paid $800 for land nobody wanted and found something beneath the soil worth more than his entire hometown. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The Greyhound bus pulled into Ridgecrest, Kentucky, just as the sun was bleeding out behind the Appalachian Hills. The sky burned orange and purple, the kind of sunset that would have been beautiful if Marcus Webb had any beauty left in him to see. He sat in the back row, forehead pressed against the cold glass, watching the town he once called home slide into view like a half-remembered dream. It looked smaller than he remembered. Everything did now. The bus hissed to a stop outside Henderson's General Store, the same spot it had stopped for 40 years. Marcus grabbed his duffel bag with one hand and reached for his crutch with the other. He was still learning to trust the prosthetic leg the VA had fitted him with 6 months ago. It was titanium and carbon fiber. State-of-the-art, they said, but it felt like a stranger attached to his body. A constant reminder that some part of him was still buried in the sand 12,000 miles away. He was 34 years old, a former Army combat engineer, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 improvised explosive device, 1 leg gone below the knee. And now, standing on the cracked sidewalk of a dying coal town, he realized he had nowhere to go. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Jolene, his younger sister. "You here yet? Cody won't stop asking about you." Marcus typed back slowly, his fingers still clumsy from the nerve damage in his left hand. "Just got in. Be there soon." He started walking. The prosthetic clicked softly against the pavement with each step, a rhythm he was still getting used to. People on the street glanced at him, some with pity, others with something harder to read. He recognized a few faces, old classmates, neighbors, people who used to wave at him when he mowed his mother's lawn as a teenager. Now they looked away like he was a ghost they weren't ready to see. Ridgecrest had never been a rich town. Coal had kept it alive for generations, but the mines had been closing one by one since Marcus was in high school. Now the main street was a parade of boarded windows and faded signs. The diner where he had his first date was gone. The hardware store where his father worked for 23 years was now a payday loan office. Even the air felt different, heavier, like the town itself was tired of breathing. He found Jolene's house at the end of Maple Street, a small 2-bedroom with peeling blue paint and a front porch that sagged in the middle. Before he could knock, the door flew open and a blur of energy crashed into his waist. "Uncle Marcus!" Cody shouted, arms wrapped tight around him. "You're home! You're really home!" Marcus dropped his duffel and knelt down, pulling the boy close. Cody was 8 now, all elbows and missing teeth and boundless excitement. Marcus had missed 3 of his birthdays, 3 Christmases, 3 years of watching this kid grow up while he was halfway around the world trying not to die. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said, his voice cracking more than he wanted it to. "I missed you." Jolene stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes wet. She was 29 but looked older, the way single mothers in small towns always did. She had been raising Cody alone since her husband left when the boy was 2. She worked double shifts at the nursing home in Millbrook, 30 miles away, just to keep the lights on. "You look like hell," she said softly. Marcus laughed, a hollow sound. "You should see the other guy." She pulled him into a hug that lasted longer than either of them expected. When she finally let go, she wiped her eyes and tried to smile. "Come on, I made meatloaf. It's probably terrible, but it's hot." That night, after Cody had fallen asleep on the couch clutching a plastic army man Marcus had brought him, the siblings sat on the back porch drinking cheap beer and watching fireflies drift through the darkness. "So what's the plan?" Jolene asked. She wasn't being pushy, just honest. It was the way they had always talked to each other. Marcus took a long sip. "Don't have one. You could stay here. Cody would love that." He shook his head. I can't put that on you. You've got enough on your plate." Jolene was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and squeezed his hand. "You're not a burden, Marcus. You're my brother." He didn't answer. He didn't know how to explain that the burden wasn't about money or space. It was about the nightmares that woke him at 3 a.m, screaming names of men who weren't there anymore. It was about the phantom pain that shot through a leg he no longer had. It was about the way he flinched at loud noises and couldn't stand crowds and sometimes forgot where he was for seconds that felt like hours. He wasn't the same man who left Ridgecrest 8 years ago. He wasn't sure he was any kind of man at all anymore. The next few weeks passed in a grey blur. Marcus found a rundown trailer on the outskirts of town, a single wide from the 1970s that leaked when it rained and groaned when the wind blew. The rent was $200 a month, which was about all his disability check could handle after food and medication. He tried to find work. He really did. But Ridgecrest didn't have much to offer, and what jobs existed went to men with 2 good legs and no baggage. The auto shop said they weren't hiring. The construction company said the same. Even the gas station on Route 12 looked at his prosthetic and his scars and said they'd call him back. They never did. He spent most days sitting on the trailer steps, staring at the hills, trying to remember why he had fought so hard to survive. The VA had given him pamphlets about PTSD, about survivor's guilt, about reintegration. He had thrown them all away. What good were pamphlets when you couldn't close your eyes without seeing your best friend bleeding out in the sand? The only light in those dark weeks was Cody. The boy came by almost every day after school, riding his bike the 2 miles from Jolene's house just to sit with Marcus and ask questions about everything. About the army, about helicopters, about whether Marcus had ever met any real heroes. "You're a hero, Uncle Marcus," Cody said one afternoon, completely matter of fact. Marcus shook his head. "Heroes don't come home like this, buddy." Cody frowned, thinking hard. "My teacher says heroes are people who do scary things to help other people." "You did that, right?" Marcus looked at the boy, at his earnest face and trusting eyes, and felt something crack open in his chest. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I guess I did." That night, for the first time in months, Marcus didn't have a nightmare. He dreamed of building something instead. A house, a garden, a life. When he woke up, the sun was streaming through the cracked blinds, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Small and fragile, but there. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. Marcus was at Henderson's general store, buying coffee and trying to ignore the stares, when he noticed a flyer pinned to the community bulletin board. It was yellow, faded, the kind of paper that had been hanging there for months. Tax auction, it read. 15 acres, unimproved land, old mining property, starting bid, $500. He stared at the flyer for a long time. 15 acres was a lot of land. Even worthless land was still land. And the starting bid was less than 3 months of rent on his trailer. "Where is this?" he asked the cashier, a woman named Betty who had known his mother. She squinted at the flyer. "Oh, that's the old Garrett property. Up past Miller's Creek, near the abandoned coal seam. Anyone else bidding on it?" Betty laughed. "Honey, nobody wants that land. Folks say it's cursed. Cave-ins, sinkholes, all kinds of trouble. Old man Garrett died up there 15 years ago, and they never even found his body. Just his truck, sitting empty on the ridge." Marcus looked at the flyer again. Something about it called to him. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe it was the price. Maybe it was the fact that everyone else had given up on it, the same way everyone seemed to have given up on him. He tore the flyer from the board. "When's the auction?" Betty shook her head slowly. "Saturday, 10 in the morning. Courthouse steps." Marcus nodded. "Thanks," she called after him as he walked out. "Marcus Webb, you ain't seriously thinking about buying that cursed land, are you?" He didn't answer. He was already thinking about what he could build there, away from the stairs and the pity and the memories. A cabin, a garden, a place where he could figure out who he was now that the war was over and everything else had fallen apart. Saturday came cold and overcast. Marcus stood on the courthouse steps with 11 other people, most of them land speculators from out of town with pressed suits and clipboards. The auctioneer was a skinny man with a bow tie and a voice that carried across the square. Lot 47, the auctioneer announced. 15 acres, unimproved, former mining property. Known hazards include possible sinkholes and unstable terrain. Starting bid is $500. Do I have 500? One of the speculators raised his paddle. 500. Marcus raised his hand. 600. The speculator glanced at him, then looked away. The auctioneer waited. No one else bid. Going once, going twice. Sold for $600 to the gentleman in the back. And just like that, Marcus Webb owned 15 acres of cursed Kentucky hillside. The paperwork took an hour. The total, including fees and back taxes, came to $814. It was almost everything he had in his checking account. Jolene thought he was crazy. "You bought what?" she said when he told her that night. "Land," Marcus said simply. 15 acres. I'm going to build something. "Build what?" "Marcus, that property is dangerous. People have died up there. People die everywhere," he said. "At least up there, I'll be alone." She stared at him for a long moment, then sighed. "You're just like Dad, stubborn as a mule and twice as deaf." He smiled, the first real smile in weeks. "Thanks for the compliment." The first time Marcus visited his land, he took Cody with him. Jolene had agreed reluctantly, making Marcus promise to keep the boy close and be back before dark. They drove Marcus's old pickup truck up a winding dirt road that hadn't seen maintenance in years. Branches scraped the sides of the truck like skeletal fingers. The engine groaned on the steep grades. When they finally reached the top, Marcus killed the engine and stepped out into silence. The land stretched before them, wild and overgrown. Oak trees and pine trees and tangles of honeysuckle. A rusted piece of mining equipment poked out of the weeds like a forgotten skeleton. In the distance, the hills rolled away toward the horizon, endless and ancient. "It's like a jungle," Cody whispered, eyes wide. Marcus nodded. "Yeah, it is." They spent the afternoon exploring. Marcus moved slowly, his prosthetic sinking into soft earth, his crutch catching on roots. But he didn't mind. For the first time in months, he felt something other than pain. He felt possibility. Near the center of the property, they found the remains of an old cabin, just a foundation and a crumbling chimney. Marcus knelt beside it, running his fingers over the stones. Someone had lived here once. Someone had built something and called it home. "Uncle Marcus," Cody called from a few yards away. "What's this?" Marcus stood and walked over. The boy was standing at the edge of a clearing, pointing at something half-hidden by brush and fallen leaves. At first, Marcus thought it was a well cover, or maybe an old cellar door. But as he pulled away the vines and debris, his heart began to beat faster. It wasn't wood. It was concrete. Thick, reinforced concrete, the kind the military used for bunkers. And in the center was a hatch, circular, with a wheel lock that looked like something from a submarine. Marcus knelt beside it, his engineering mind already analyzing what he was seeing. The concrete was old but expertly poured. No cracks, no deterioration. Whoever built this knew what they were doing. This wasn't some hillbilly fallout shelter. This was professional. Government grade. "What is it?" Cody asked. Marcus shook his head slowly. "I don't know, buddy. But it's been here a long time." He tried the wheel. It didn't budge. Decades of rust and dirt had seized it solid. But Marcus could see that the mechanism was intact. With the right tools and enough patience, it could be opened. "Can we go inside?" Cody asked, bouncing with excitement. "Not today," Marcus said. "It's getting dark. We need to head back. But we'll come back, right? We'll open it?" Marcus looked at the hatch. at the mystery buried beneath the soil of his own land. "Yeah," he said, "we'll come back." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in his trailer, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with questions. What was that hatch? Who built it? Why was it hidden on 15 acres of supposedly worthless land? He pulled out his laptop and started searching. Cold War bunkers in Kentucky, underground military installations, government fallout shelters. The results were scattered and incomplete, but he found enough to confirm his suspicions. During the 1950s and 60s, the federal government had built hundreds of secret bunkers across the country. Most were decommissioned and sealed. Some were forgotten entirely. Could this be one of them? And if so, what was inside? The next morning, Marcus drove to the hardware store in Millbrook and bought supplies. A heavy-duty pipe wrench, penetrating oil, a crowbar, a flashlight with fresh batteries. The clerk looked at him strangely, but didn't ask questions. In a town like this, people minded their own business. He returned to the property alone this time. Jolene had made him promise not to take Cody until he knew what they were dealing with. He parked the truck at the top of the ridge and hiked to the clearing, his prosthetic leg aching with every step. The hatch looked the same, silent and waiting. Marcus knelt beside it and went to work. He sprayed penetrating oil into every seam and joint, then let it sit while he cleared more brush from the area. An hour later he gripped the wheel lock and pulled. It groaned. Metal scraped against metal. Rust flaked away like dead skin. But slowly, impossibly, the wheel began to turn. "Come on," Marcus muttered through clenched teeth. "Come on, one more pull." The lock released with a deep thunk that echoed through the hills. Marcus stepped back, breathing hard, and stared at what he had just opened. The hatch was heavy, at least 300 pounds of solid steel. He found a grip and pulled with everything he had. It swung open slowly, revealing a dark shaft that descended straight down into the earth. A metal ladder was bolted to the side, disappearing into blackness. Marcus clicked on his flashlight and aimed it into the hole. The beam reached about 30 feet before fading into nothing. But he could see the ladder continued farther than the light could reach. He sat back on his heels, heart pounding. Every instinct told him to call someone. The police, the military, anyone with authority. But another voice, deeper and older, whispered something different. "This is yours. This is your land, your discovery, your chance." He thought about Cody, about Jolene, about the life he had lost and the one he was trying to build. He thought about the men he had served with, the ones who didn't come home, the ones who would have given anything for one more chance to do something that mattered. Marcus Webb took a deep breath, gripped the ladder, and began to climb down. The descent felt endless. The air grew colder with each rung, damper, older. Marcus counted the rungs as he went. 10, 20, 30, 40. The shaft was deeper than he had imagined, at least 60 feet before his boots finally touched solid ground. He stood in complete darkness, the only light coming from his flashlight and the faint circle of grey sky far above. The air smelled like concrete and metal and time. He swept the beam in a slow arc, trying to understand what he was seeing. A corridor stretched before him, wide enough for two people to walk side by side. The walls were smooth concrete, painted grey but faded now, with cables and pipes running along the ceiling. Emergency lights, long dead, hung at regular intervals. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, undisturbed for what looked like decades. Marcus moved forward slowly, every sense on high alert. His training kicked in without conscious thought, scanning for threats, checking corners, listening for any sound that didn't belong. But there was nothing, just silence so complete it felt alive. The corridor turned left, then right, then opened into a larger space. Marcus stepped through and stopped breathing. It was a room the size of a basketball court, maybe bigger. Concrete pillars supported a ceiling 20 feet high, and filling every inch of available space were rows and rows of metal shelving units, stacked floor to ceiling with wooden crates and metal boxes and sealed containers of every size. Marcus walked to the nearest shelf and examined a crate. Stenciled on the side in faded black letters were numbers and codes he didn't recognize. He found a loose board and pried it open. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were gold bars. Not one or two. Dozens. Each one stamped with markings he couldn't read, but the weight was unmistakable. This was real. This was treasure. His hands trembled as he moved to the next shelf. More crates. More boxes. Some contained bundles of cash, $100 bills bound with paper bands that had yellowed with age. Others held documents, folders thick with papers covered in official stamps and signatures. Marcus walked deeper into the room, his flashlight revealing more with every step. There were filing cabinets filled with records. There were safes bolted to the floor, some open, some sealed. There were maps on the walls marked with locations he didn't recognize, and at the far end of the room, behind a heavy steel door that stood partially open, was something else. Another room, smaller, more secure. He approached it carefully, his heart hammering in his chest. The door was 6 inches of solid steel, the kind designed to survive a nuclear blast. Beyond it was a vault, and inside the vault, stacked on pallets from floor to ceiling, was more money than Marcus Webb had ever imagined existed. Cash, gold, bearer bonds, precious gems in velvet-lined cases. He stood there for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to think. The flashlight shook in his hand, casting wild shadows on the walls. This couldn't be real. This had to be a dream, another nightmare his broken mind had conjured to torment him. But the cold air was real. The smell of dust and old paper was real. The weight of the gold bar he had picked up was real. Marcus Webb, a broken veteran with nothing to his name, had just discovered a fortune buried beneath his own land. He didn't know how much it was worth. He didn't know who had put it there or why. He didn't know what to do next. All he knew, standing in that underground vault with $245 million in stolen government funds surrounding him, was that his life would never be the same. Slowly, carefully, he made his way back to the ladder. He climbed out of the darkness and into the fading light of a Kentucky afternoon. He sealed the hatch behind him, covering it with brush and leaves until it was invisible again. Then he sat on the cold ground, his back against a tree, and stared at the sky until the first stars appeared. He had gone to war looking for purpose. He had come home looking for peace. And now, on 15 acres of land that everyone said was cursed, he had found something else entirely. A secret, a fortune, a choice. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, he could feel the weight of it already beginning to press down on his shoulders. Because Marcus Webb understood something that most people never learned. Money like this didn't stay hidden forever. Secrets like this always found their way into the light. And when they did, when the world discovered what was buried beneath these hills, everything would change. The only question was whether he would be ready. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He lay in his trailer, staring at the water-stained ceiling, his mind spinning like a wheel that couldn't find traction. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it again. The vault, the gold, the endless stacks of cash wrapped in aging paper bands. $245 million, sitting in the dark beneath 15 acres of land he had bought for $800. It didn't feel real. None of it felt real. He got up before dawn and made coffee with shaking hands. The prosthetic leg sat propped against the wall, waiting for him like a patient reminder of everything he had lost. He strapped it on slowly, methodically, the way the physical therapist had taught him. One strap, then another. Tighten, adjust, stand, balance. By the time the sun crept over the ridge, Marcus was already in his truck, driving back to the property. He had to see it again. He had to know he hadn't imagined the whole thing. The hatch was exactly where he had left it, hidden beneath brush and fallen leaves. He cleared it away and opened the wheel lock, his arms remembering the motion from the day before. The steel door swung open, revealing that dark shaft descending into the earth. Marcus climbed down. The bunker was different in the light of a fresh flashlight, more detailed, more overwhelming. Yesterday he had been in shock, stumbling through the corridors like a man in a dream. Today he moved with purpose, his engineering mind cataloguing everything he saw. The main corridor extended further than he had explored before. He followed it past the storage room, past the vault, into sections of the complex he hadn't reached. Emergency lighting panels lined the walls, dead now, but clearly once powered by something substantial. Cables ran along the ceiling in neat bundles, the kind of professional installation you saw on military bases. He found living quarters, 4 bunk rooms, each with 8 beds, still made with military precision. The mattresses had degraded over the decades, but the metal frames were solid. Lockers lined the walls, most of them empty, a few containing rotted clothing and personal items too faded to identify. Beyond the bunk rooms was a kitchen, industrial stoves, stainless steel counters, walk-in refrigerators that had long since failed. The pantry shelves held rows of canned goods, their labels yellowed but still legible. Spam, beans, condensed milk, peaches. Someone had stocked this place to feed dozens of people for months, maybe years. Marcus kept moving. He found a medical bay with examination tables and glass cabinets full of supplies. Bandages and syringes and bottles of pills with expiration dates from 1967. He found a communications room with radio equipment he recognized from his training, Cold War-era stuff, vacuum tubes and analog dials, sophisticated for its time, but ancient now. And then he found the command center. It was the largest room in the complex, positioned at what felt like the geographic center of the bunker. Maps covered every wall, topographical surveys of the surrounding region, blueprints of the facility itself, and larger maps showing locations across the eastern United States, marked with red pins. A conference table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by chairs that had once been leather but had cracked and faded with time. At the head of the table was a desk, and on that desk, preserved in the dry underground air, were documents. Marcus approached slowly, his flashlight beam steady despite his racing heart. The papers were yellowed but legible, typed on old manual typewriters with occasional handwritten notes in the margins. He picked up the first folder and began to read. Project Deep Shelter, the cover page announced. Classified, authorized personnel only. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning for meaning. Construction reports, budget allocations, personnel rosters. And then, buried in the middle of the stack, a name that appeared again and again. Harold Thorne. Marcus pulled out every document that mentioned him. According to the records, Thorne had been a defense contractor in the 1950s, one of dozens of businessmen who had grown wealthy building infrastructure for the Cold War. Bunkers, radar stations, missile silos. The government had handed out contracts like candy, and Thorne had grabbed more than his share. But these documents told a different story. Thorne hadn't just built bunkers for the government. He had built this one for himself, using government funds, government materials, government labor. And when the project was complete, he had erased it from the official records. Marcus found a memo dated November 12, 1963. It was addressed to Thorne from someone identified only by initials. The shipment has been secured, it read. Final transport complete. All records destroyed per your instructions. The partners are satisfied. The partners. Marcus made a note of that phrase. He kept digging. More memos, more reports. A handwritten ledger that tracked deposits, millions of dollars flowing into accounts that didn't exist on any official books. The numbers were staggering. By 1975, Thorne had siphoned over $100 million from government contracts. By 1985, that number had doubled. And then, in 1989, the entries stopped. Marcus found a newspaper clipping tucked into the back of the ledger. "Local businessman dies in plane crash," the headline read. Harold Thorne, 67, prominent contractor and philanthropist, killed when private aircraft went down in Smoky Mountains. No survivors. Body not recovered. Marcus sat back in the chair, dust swirling in his flashlight beam. Thorne was dead, had been dead for over 30 years. And all this time, his fortune had been sitting here, buried beneath the Kentucky hills, waiting. But waiting for what? Waiting for whom? The answer came in the last folder Marcus opened. It was thicker than the others, bound with a rubber band that crumbled to dust when he touched it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, spanning decades, and they were all from the same person. "Dear Harold," the first one began, "the 1964 acquisition is complete. Our partners in Washington have ensured the paperwork will never surface. Your share has been deposited as agreed. With regards, Victor." Marcus flipped through the letters, watching the relationship unfold across the years. Harold and Victor, partners in theft, co-conspirators in one of the largest fraud schemes Marcus had ever imagined. The letters mentioned other names too, senators and generals and businessmen, a network of corruption that stretched from Kentucky to Washington and beyond. The final letter was dated December 1988, just months before Thorne's death. "Harold," it read, "I've received disturbing news. There are questions being asked about the old contracts. We may need to accelerate our timeline. Please confirm the location remains secure. The next generation must be protected. Yours, Victor, the next generation." Marcus stared at those words for a long time. Thorne was dead, but Victor, whoever he was, might still be alive. And if he was, he had spent the last 35 years knowing that a fortune was buried somewhere in these hills. Marcus gathered the most important documents and climbed back to the surface. The sun was high now, the air warm and thick with the smell of pine. He sealed the hatch and covered it again, his movements automatic while his mind raced. He needed help. He needed someone he could trust, someone who understood the world he had stumbled into. And there was only one person in Ridgecrest who fit that description. Earl Dawson lived in a cabin on the other side of town, set back from the road behind a wall of oak trees. He was 73 years old, a Vietnam veteran who had served 2 tours as a Marine before coming home to spend 30 years as the county sheriff. He had known Marcus's father since childhood, had been a pallbearer at his funeral, and had checked on Marcus's mother every week until she passed. If there was anyone Marcus could trust with this, it was Earl. He found the old man on his front porch, cleaning a shotgun with the casual expertise of someone who had done it 10,000 times. Earl looked up as Marcus's truck pulled into the driveway, his weathered face creasing into something that might have been a smile. "Marcus Webb," Earl said. "Haven't seen you since the funeral. How's that leg treating you?" Marcus climbed out of the truck, folder tucked under his arm. "It's attached. That's about all I can say for it." Earl nodded slowly. War has a way of taking pieces of a man. Some you can see, some you can't. Marcus walked up to the porch and sat in the empty rocker beside Earl. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft click of metal as Earl reassembled the shotgun. "I found something," Marcus finally said. "On that land I bought." Earl's hands paused. "The old Garrett property?" "Yeah." "What kind of something?" Marcus handed him the folder. Earl set down the shotgun and opened it, his eyes scanning the first page. Then the second. By the third, his expression had changed from curiosity to something much harder to read. "Where did you get this?" Earl asked quietly. "There's a bunker," Marcus said. "Underground. Cold War era, maybe earlier. And it's full of money, Earl. Gold, cash, bearer bonds, more than I can count." Earl looked at him for a long moment. How much more? Marcus swallowed. The documents say 245 million. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. Earl set down the folder and stared out at the trees, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite spit out. You know what you've found? Earl said finally. It wasn't a question. I'm starting to figure it out. This Harold Thorne, Earl continued, tapping the folder. I remember that name. He was before my time as sheriff, but the old-timers used to talk about him. Rich man from Lexington, owned half the county at one point, died in a plane crash back in '89. The documents say he stole from the government for 30 years, Marcus said, and he had partners, people in Washington, people who might still be alive. Earl nodded slowly. Money like this doesn't stay hidden forever. Someone's been looking for it. Probably been looking since Thorne died. Marcus felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. That's what I was afraid of. Earl picked up the folder again and flipped to the letters. This Victor, you have any idea who he is? Not yet, but I'm going to find out. Earl shook his head. No, you're going to be careful. There's a difference. He stood and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the road. Marcus, I've seen what happens when ordinary people stumble into extraordinary situations. Most of the time, it doesn't end well. You've got a sister who loves you, a nephew who thinks you're a hero. You've got a chance to build a life here, a real life. Don't throw that away chasing ghosts. Marcus stood too. I'm not chasing anything. This fell into my lap, and I can't just pretend it's not there. Earl turned to face him. Then what are you going to do? I don't know yet, but I need to understand what I'm dealing with before I make any decisions. Earl studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but you keep me in the loop. Anything happens, anything at all, you come to me first, understood? Understood. Marcus drove back to his trailer as the sun began to set. He felt better having told Earl, like a weight had shifted from his shoulders to someone else's. But the relief was short-lived. As he turned onto the dirt road that led to his property, he saw it. A black SUV parked at the edge of the tree line facing his trailer. The windows were tinted dark enough that he couldn't see inside. The license plate was from out of state. Ohio, maybe, or Indiana. Marcus slowed his truck and watched. The SUV didn't move. No doors opened. No one got out. It just sat there, silent and waiting, like a predator studying its prey. He pulled into his driveway and killed the engine. For a long moment he sat behind the wheel, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. The SUV remained motionless. Finally, Marcus got out and walked toward his trailer. He didn't look back. He didn't give them the satisfaction. But every nerve in his body was screaming, and the old instincts, the ones that had kept him alive in Afghanistan, were roaring back to life. Someone was watching him. What happens next will turn this story upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest battles are the most dangerous. Stay tuned to see what unfolds. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The SUV was gone by morning, but Marcus knew it would be back. He spent the next 3 days researching everything he could find about Harold Thorne. The internet was surprisingly bare, just a few archived newspaper articles and a brief Wikipedia entry that mentioned his government contracts and his death. No family, no heirs, no foundation or charitable trust. It was like the man had been erased from history. But the letters mentioned Victor, and Victor had mentioned the next generation. Marcus dug deeper. He searched for Thorne's business partners, his associates, anyone connected to the contracts he had worked on. Most of the names led nowhere, dead ends and obituaries and faded memories. But one name kept appearing in the margins of the documents. Kane. It was scrawled in Thorne's handwriting on several of the letters, sometimes with a question mark, sometimes circled. Marcus searched for Kane and Thorne together, and finally, buried in a 1972 article from the Lexington Herald Leader, he found it. Thorn Industries announces partnership with Kane Development Group, the headline read. The article described a joint venture to build housing for military families, a project worth tens of millions of dollars. The two principals were Harold Thorn and Raymond Kane. Marcus searched for Raymond Kane next. The results were more plentiful. Kane had been a real estate developer in the 60s and 70s, a self-made millionaire who had built his fortune on government contracts. He had died in 1991, 2 years after Thorn, of natural causes. But Raymond Kane had a son, Victor Kane. Marcus stared at the screen, his blood running cold. Victor wasn't just a name in old letters. He was a real person, a powerful person. According to the articles Marcus found, Victor Kane had taken over his father's company in the early 90s and transformed it into one of the largest real estate development firms in the Midwest. Kane Properties now owned shopping centers, office buildings, and thousands of acres of land across 6 states, including, Marcus discovered with growing horror, several properties in eastern Kentucky. He pulled up the county records and started searching. Kane Properties had been buying land in the region for years. Small parcels, remote acreage, properties that bordered the old Garrett land, the land Marcus now owned. They were surrounding him. Marcus pushed back from the laptop and tried to breathe. This wasn't a coincidence. Victor Kane, son of Thorn's partner, had spent decades quietly acquiring land around the bunker. He knew it was here. He just didn't know exactly where. Until now, the tax auction, Marcus's bid, the black SUV watching his trailer. It all made sense. Somehow, Kane had learned that someone had finally bought the Garrett property. And now he was watching, waiting, trying to figure out what Marcus knew. That night, Marcus lay awake, listening to every sound. The wind in the trees, the creak of the trailer's walls, the distant rumble of traffic on the highway. He kept his father's old hunting rifle beside the bed, loaded and ready. Around 2 a.m, he heard something different. Footsteps. Marcus moved without thinking, rolling out of bed and grabbing the rifle in one fluid motion. He pressed himself against the wall beside the window and peered through a gap in the blinds. A figure was moving through his yard, dark clothing, deliberate steps, heading toward his truck. Marcus slipped out the back door, circling around the trailer with the rifle raised. His prosthetic leg was silent on the soft earth, and he moved with the practiced stealth of a man who had spent years operating in hostile territory. The figure was at his truck now, trying the door handle. Marcus could see him more clearly in the moonlight. Young, athletic build, wearing black tactical gear. "Don't move," Marcus said, his voice calm and cold. The figure spun. Marcus saw the glint of metal, a pistol coming up, and he reacted on instinct. He closed the distance in 2 steps, knocked the weapon aside, and drove the butt of his rifle into the man's solar plexus. The intruder went down hard, gasping for air. Marcus kicked the pistol away and pressed his boot against the man's chest. "Who sent you?" Marcus demanded. The man wheezed, his eyes wide with pain and surprise. He hadn't expected resistance, certainly not from a one-legged veteran living in a rusted trailer. "Who sent you?" Marcus repeated, applying more pressure. The man shook his head. "I don't know. I just follow orders." "Whose orders?" "I don't know his name. Just a voice on the phone. Said to watch you. Report what you do, where you go." Marcus leaned closer. "You tell your boss something for me. You tell him this land is mine, and if anyone comes onto it again without my permission, they won't walk away." He stepped back and let the man scramble to his feet. The intruder staggered toward the road, disappearing into the darkness without looking back. Marcus watched until he was gone, then stood alone in the moonlight, his heart pounding. They were coming. He didn't know when, and he didn't know how many, but they were coming. And if he was going to protect what he had found, if he was going to protect his family and his future, he needed to be ready. The next morning, Marcus drove to Earl's cabin and told him everything. The old sheriff listened in silence, his face growing darker with each revelation. "Victor Kane," Earl said when Marcus finished. I've heard that name. He's been buying up half the county over the past 10 years. Folks thought he was just another developer looking for cheap land. But now we know what he's really after," Marcus finished. Earl stood and walked to his gun safe. He opened it and pulled out a manila folder, thick with papers. "I did some digging of my own," Earl said, "after you told me about the bunker. Made some calls to old friends, people who remember things the official records forgot." He handed Marcus the folder. Inside were photocopies of old documents, handwritten notes, and a photograph that made Marcus's blood freeze. It showed 3 men standing in front of a construction site. They were smiling, shaking hands, clearly celebrating something. Marcus recognized Harold Thorne from the newspaper articles. The second man was Raymond Kane, Victor's father, but the third man was the one who caught his attention. He was younger than the others, maybe 30, with sharp features and cold eyes, and he was wearing a military uniform. "Who is this?" Marcus asked. Earl's jaw tightened. "That's the part you're not going to like. According to my sources, that's General William Prescott. He was Pentagon brass during the Cold War, responsible for overseeing construction of classified facilities. He died in 2003, but his son is still very much alive." Marcus looked up. "His son?" "Senator James Prescott," Earl said, "chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, one of the most powerful men in Washington." Marcus stared at the photograph. Thorne, Kane, and Prescott. 3 families, 3 generations. A conspiracy that had survived for over 60 years. And now he was standing in the middle of it. "If Kane is connected to Prescott," Marcus said slowly, "then this isn't just about money. This is about power, about covering up decades of fraud at the highest levels of government." Earl nodded. "Which means you're not just dealing with a greedy developer. You're dealing with people who have the resources to make problems disappear. People who have done it before and will do it again." Marcus thought about Jolene, about Cody, about the life he was trying to build from the wreckage of everything he had lost. "What do I do?" he asked. Earl placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. "You do what soldiers do. You dig in, you fortify, and you find allies you can trust." Marcus spent the next week transforming his property. He installed motion sensors along the perimeter. He set up trail cameras at every access point. He reinforced the doors and windows of his trailer, and he mapped out defensive positions in case he needed them. But he also reached out to old army buddies who had served with him in Afghanistan, to contacts at the VA who might have information about government contracts, to journalists who specialized in investigating corruption. Most of them couldn't help. Some were afraid to, but 2 responded. Danny Chen was a former combat medic who had saved Marcus's life after the ID explosion. He was struggling with his own demons, bouncing between odd jobs and VA hospitals. But when Marcus called, he didn't hesitate. "Where do you need me?" Danny asked. "Kentucky," Marcus said, "and bring your medical kit." Rosa Martinez was different. She had been a communications specialist in Marcus's unit, one of the best he had ever worked with. After her discharge, she had gone into private security, working for firms that protected corporate executives and government officials. She knew how the other side operated. "This is big, Marcus," she said when he explained the situation. "If you're right about the Kane and Prescott connection, you're poking a hornet's nest that doesn't want to be poked." "I know," Marcus said. "That's why I need you." There was a long pause. Then Rosa sighed. "I'll be there in 3 days. But Marcus, you need to understand something. Once we start down this road, there's no going back." "I know," he said. "I'm counting on it." The night before Danny and Rosa arrived, Marcus stood at the entrance to the bunker, staring down into the darkness. The fortune below represented everything he had never had: security, stability, a future for his family. But it also represented danger, corruption, and the kind of secrets that got people killed. He thought about his father, who had worked himself to death in a hardware store just to keep food on the table. He thought about his mother, who had spent her final years alone while he was fighting a war halfway around the world. He thought about all the promises he had made and broken, all the chances he had missed. And then he thought about Cody, about the way the boy looked at him, like he was still capable of being a hero. Marcus Webb had spent years trying to survive. Now, for the first time since he lost his leg, he was ready to fight, and God help anyone who tried to stop him. Earl called the next morning with news that made Marcus's stomach drop. "I found something," Earl said, his voice grim. "Victor Kane is in town, checked into the Ridgecrest Motor Lodge last night. And Marcus, he's not alone. He's got 6 men with him, all of them ex-military." Marcus gripped the phone tighter. "He's making his move. Looks that way. Word around town is he's been asking questions. About you, about the property, about what you've been doing up there." Marcus looked out the window at the hills where his land waited, hiding secrets worth more than he could comprehend. He thought about the bunker, the vault, the documents that could expose decades of corruption at the highest levels of power, and he realized that the real battle was just beginning. "Let him come," Marcus said quietly. "I'll be ready." Danny arrived first, driving a beat-up Honda Civic that looked like it had survived more wars than he had. He pulled into Marcus's driveway just after noon, unfolding his lanky frame from the driver's seat with the careful movements of a man whose body had been broken and rebuilt more times than he could count. Marcus met him in the yard. For a moment, they just stood there, 2 soldiers separated by years and miles but connected by something deeper than words. Then Danny grinned, the same crooked smile he had worn when he was pulling Marcus out of a burning Humvee. "You look like hell," Danny said. Marcus laughed. "You should talk. When's the last time you slept?" Danny shrugged. "Sleep is overrated. You got coffee?" They sat on the trailer steps drinking bitter instant coffee while Marcus explained everything. The bunker, the fortune, the documents, Victor Kane and his army of ex-military enforcers. Danny listened without interrupting, his dark eyes growing harder with each revelation. "So let me get this straight," Danny said when Marcus finished. "You found $245 million buried under your land, and now one of the richest men in the Midwest wants to take it from you. And you called me because you thought I might want to get shot at again." Marcus smiled. "I called you because you're the only person I trust to have my back." Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. "Well, I wasn't doing anything important anyway." Rosa arrived the next morning in a black SUV that made Marcus tense until he saw her behind the wheel. She was smaller than he remembered, compact and fierce, with close-cropped hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had traded her military fatigues for civilian tactical gear, but she still moved like a soldier. "Nice place," she said, looking at the trailer. "Very rustic." Marcus shrugged. "It keeps the rain out, mostly." Rosa walked the perimeter of the property while Marcus and Danny watched. She checked the motion sensors, examined the trail cameras, and made notes on a small tablet. When she came back, her expression was grim. "Your security is adequate for deterring amateurs," she said. "But if Kane sends professionals, which he will, they'll punch through in minutes." "Then help me make it better," Marcus said. Rosa nodded. "That's why I'm here." They spent the next 3 days fortifying the property. Rosa designed overlapping fields of surveillance that covered every approach. Danny set up a medical station in the trailer, stocking it with supplies that would make a field hospital jealous. Marcus focused on the bunker itself, creating hidden caches of weapons and equipment, mapping escape routes, and preparing contingencies for scenarios he hoped would never happen. It was exhausting work, physically and mentally, but for the first time since he had come home from war, Marcus felt like he had a mission again, a purpose, something worth fighting for. On the 4th day, Victor Kane came calling. Marcus was working on the perimeter fence when he heard the vehicles approaching, 3 black SUVs moving in formation up the dirt road that led to his property. They stopped at the gate, and a man stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was tall and silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than Marcus's trailer. His face was tanned and smooth, the kind of face that appeared on magazine covers and campaign posters. But his eyes were cold, calculating, the eyes of a predator sizing up its prey. "Marcus Webb," the man said, his voice carrying across the distance between them. "I'm Victor Kane. I believe we have some business to discuss." Marcus set down his tools and walked toward the gate, his prosthetic leg clicking softly against the packed earth. Danny and Rosa appeared behind him, flanking him like shadows. "I don't recall having any business with you," Marcus said. Kane smiled. "Perhaps not yet. But I think you'll find I have a proposition that's very much worth your time." He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope, thick and crisp and white. Inside, Marcus knew without looking, would be a check, probably with a lot of zeros. "I'm prepared to offer you $2 million for this property," Kane said. "Cash. No questions asked. You could walk away today a wealthy man." Marcus didn't touch the envelope. Why would you pay $2 million for 15 acres of worthless hillside? Kane's smile didn't waver. "Let's just say I have sentimental reasons. This land has history. History that's important to my family." Marcus met his gaze. "You mean the bunker your father helped Harold Thorne build? The one filled with stolen government money?" The smile finally cracked. Just a fraction, just for a moment. But Marcus saw it, the mask slipping, the predator realizing its prey had teeth. "I don't know what you think you've found," Kane said carefully, "but I assure you any historical artifacts on this property would be of interest only to collectors and historians. Certainly not worth more than the generous offer I'm making." Marcus shook his head. "I'm not selling." Kane's eyes hardened. "Mr. Webb, I'm trying to be reasonable here. You're a veteran, a hero, and you deserve to be compensated fairly for your service. But this land, it's not something you want to hold on to. Trust me." "Is that a threat?" Kane laughed softly. "Not at all. Merely friendly advice. This region can be dangerous for outsiders. Sinkholes, cave-ins, accidents. I'd hate to see anything happen to you or your family." The way he said the word made Marcus's blood turn to ice. Jolene. Cody. Kane knew about them. Marcus stepped closer to the gate, close enough to see the tiny lines around Kane's eyes, the slight tension in his jaw. "We're done here." Kane studied him for a long moment. Then he tucked the envelope back into his jacket. "I'll give you some time to reconsider. But Mr. Webb, my patience isn't infinite, and neither is my generosity." He turned and walked back to his SUV. The convoy reversed down the dirt road and disappeared around the bend. Marcus stood at the gate until the sound of their engines faded to nothing. "That went well," Danny said dryly. Rosa was already on her phone. "I'm pulling everything I can find on Kane's security team. We need to know what we're dealing with." Marcus turned to face them. "He knows about Jolene and Cody. We need to move them somewhere safe." "The bunker?" Danny asked. Marcus nodded. "It's the only place Kane can't reach." Convincing Jolene was harder than Marcus expected. She stood in her kitchen with her arms crossed, her face a mixture of fear and fury. "You want me to take my son and hide in some underground hole because of a rich man's threats?" she demanded. "Marcus, this is insane." "It's temporary," Marcus said. "Just until I can figure out how to handle Kane." "Handle him how?" "By fighting him?" "Marcus, he has lawyers and politicians and God knows what else. You have a trailer and a bad leg." Marcus flinched. Jolene saw it and her expression softened. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. And you're right. But Jolene, I can't let him win. Not because of the money. Because of what that money represents. Decades of theft and corruption and powerful people getting away with whatever they want." He stepped closer and took her hands. "Dad worked himself to death in that hardware store. Mom spent her last years alone because I was fighting a war that didn't mean anything, and now I have a chance to do something that matters, to expose people who think they're above the law, to protect the town they've been trying to buy and control for decades." Jolene's eyes glistened. "And if you get killed? Then at least Cody will know his uncle died fighting for something, not drinking himself to death in a trailer or putting a bullet in his brain because he couldn't find a reason to keep going." The words hung in the air between them. Marcus hadn't meant to say them, hadn't even realized he was thinking them. But they were true. Every day since he came home, he had been searching for a reason to stay alive, and now he had found one. Jolene wiped her eyes. "Fine, we'll go to your bunker. But Marcus, if anything happens to Cody—" "Nothing will happen to Cody," Marcus said. "I promise." Moving Jolene and Cody into the bunker took most of the night. Marcus had prepared one of the bunk rooms for them, cleaning out the decades of dust and setting up battery-powered lanterns and portable heaters. Rosa had rigged a communication system that would let them stay in contact with the surface. Cody thought it was the greatest adventure of his life. "It's like a secret base," he whispered as they descended the ladder. "Are we hiding from bad guys?" Marcus smiled despite himself. "Something like that, buddy." Once they were settled, Marcus returned to the surface and sealed the hatch. For the first time since he found the bunker, he felt like he was doing the right thing, protecting his family, standing his ground, being the man his father had raised him to be. The retaliation started the next morning. First, it was small things. His water was shut off without explanation. When he called the county, they said his account showed unpaid bills dating back 6 months, bills he had never received. Then his power was cut, same excuse. Then a notice arrived informing him that his property taxes were under review for possible fraud. "Kane's playing hardball," Rosa said, examining the notices. "These are harassment tactics, designed to make your life miserable until you give up." Marcus threw the papers on the table. "How long can he keep this up?" "As long as he wants. He's got lawyers on retainer whose only job is to find ways to make problems for people like you." Danny looked up from the medical supplies he was inventorying. "So what do we do?" Marcus thought about the vault beneath his feet, the millions of dollars sitting in the darkness. Money that could solve every problem he had ever faced. Money that could buy lawyers and politicians and whatever else he needed to fight Kane on his own terms, but using that money would make him no better than the men who had stolen it in the first place. "We fight smart," Marcus said. "Kane thinks he can pressure me into submission. We show him he's wrong." Over the next week, Marcus turned Kane's tactics against him. Every time the county tried to shut off a service, Marcus documented it and filed complaints with state agencies. Every time a mysterious accident damaged his property, he reported it to the state police and sent copies to local newspapers. Every time Kane's lawyers sent threatening letters, Marcus had Rosa post them online with detailed explanations of the harassment campaign. The story started to spread. Local news picked it up first, then regional outlets. "Veteran targeted by wealthy developer," the headlines read. "David versus Goliath in rural Kentucky." People started showing up at Marcus's property, neighbors he had never met, bringing food and supplies. Veterans from the local VFW post offering to stand watch. Even a few reporters, though Marcus turned most of them away. But not everyone was supportive. Some folks in Ridgecrest thought Marcus was stirring up trouble, bringing unwanted attention to a town that just wanted to be left alone. "You should take the money and run," Betty from Henderson's General Store told him one afternoon. "Kane's going to win eventually. He always does." Marcus shook his head. If everyone thought that way, people like Kane would run the whole world. Betty snorted. "Honey, people like Kane already run the whole world. The rest of us just try to stay out of their way." The confrontation everyone had been expecting came on a Thursday night. Marcus was in the trailer reviewing documents when Rosa's voice crackled over the radio. Movement on the north perimeter. 6, maybe 8 individuals. They're armed. Marcus grabbed his rifle and headed for the door. Danny was already outside, crouched behind the truck with his own weapon ready. "This is it," Danny said. "You ready?" Marcus checked his magazine. "No, but let's do it anyway." They moved through the darkness toward the north perimeter, using the terrain for cover. Rosa's voice guided them, calling out positions and movements. The intruders were professionals, moving in coordinated patterns, but they weren't expecting resistance. Marcus and Danny hit them from the flank. The first 2 went down before they knew what was happening, tackled and disarmed with brutal efficiency. The others scattered, confused, their formation broken. What followed was chaos. Muzzle flashes in the darkness, shouted commands, the crack of gunfire and the thud of bodies hitting the ground. Marcus moved on instinct, his training taking over, the prosthetic leg no longer a hindrance but just another part of his body. When it was over, 5 of Kane's men were zip-tied and groaning on the ground. The other 3 had fled into the woods. Marcus stood over them, breathing hard, his rifle still raised. "You tell your boss something," Marcus said. "You tell him this land is protected, and the next time he sends men to take it, they won't walk away." He let them go, watched them stumble down the road toward their vehicles. Then he turned to Danny and Rosa, both of them bruised and bleeding but alive. "Well," Rosa said, wiping blood from a cut on her forehead, "that could have gone worse." Danny laughed, the slightly unhinged laugh of a man who had just survived another firefight. "I forgot how much I missed this." Marcus didn't laugh. He was thinking about what came next. Kane wouldn't stop. If anything, this would make him more determined. What happens next will test everything Marcus believes in, reveal betrayals nobody saw coming, and force him to make the hardest choice of his life. Stay tuned to see how this battle unfolds. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The attack on Kane's men made the news the next day. "Private security personnel injured in confrontation with property owner," the headline said. Kane's lawyers immediately filed charges, claiming Marcus had assaulted innocent surveyors conducting routine work. The charges wouldn't stick. Marcus had documented everything, and the weapons Kane's men had been carrying told a different story than innocent surveyors. But the message was clear. Kane was escalating, and then Earl was hospitalized. Marcus got the call at 6 in the morning. Earl's cabin had burned down in the middle of the night. The old sheriff had barely made it out alive, suffering smoke inhalation and second-degree burns over 20% of his body. Marcus drove to the hospital in Millbrook, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. When he arrived, Earl was unconscious, wrapped in bandages, tubes running in and out of his body. "The doctors say he'll live," Jolene said. She had come up from the bunker when she heard the news. But Marcus, this wasn't an accident. Marcus knew. He had known the moment he heard about the fire. "Kane did this," he said quietly, "because Earl was helping me." Jolene grabbed his arm. "Marcus, you have to stop this, before someone dies." He looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, and felt something crack inside him. She was right. People were getting hurt because of him, because of his stubbornness, because of his pride. Maybe Betty was right. Maybe he should just take the money and run. But even as the thought formed, he rejected it. Kane had burned down an old man's home, had sent armed men to attack a veteran on his own property, had threatened a single mother and her child. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about who got to decide what was right and wrong, who got to exercise power without consequences. Marcus had spent his entire military career fighting people who thought they were above the law. He wasn't about to stop now. "I need to make some calls," he told Jolene. "Stay here with Earl." Over the next 48 hours, Marcus worked the phones. He called every contact he had, every journalist, every lawyer, every politician who might be willing to listen. Most of them were sympathetic, but cautious. Kane was too powerful. The evidence was too circumstantial. Nobody wanted to stick their neck out for a one-legged veteran fighting a billionaire. But one person called back. Meredith Cole was an investigative journalist for a national news outlet. She had spent her career exposing corruption, and she had a particular interest in cases involving government contractors and defense spending. "Mr. Webb," she said, "I've been following your story, and I think you might have something bigger than you realize." Marcus explained everything. The bunker, the documents, Harold Thorne and Raymond Kane and General William Prescott, the decades of fraud, the cover-up, the connection to Senator James Prescott. Meredith was quiet for a long time when he finished. "Do you understand what you're sitting on?" she finally asked. "This isn't just about a fortune buried in Kentucky. This is about systemic corruption at the highest levels of government. Senators, generals, defense contractors. This could bring down careers, end dynasties." "I understand," Marcus said. "That's why I'm calling you. Mr. Webb, if you're right about this, you're going to need more than documents. You're going to need witnesses, corroboration, a chain of evidence that can't be dismissed or discredited." Marcus thought about the bunker, the filing cabinets filled with records, the photographs and letters and contracts that documented everything. "I have evidence," he said, "enough to fill a warehouse, but getting it out safely, that's going to be the hard part." Meredith's voice sharpened. "What do you mean?" Marcus told her about Kane's attacks. The harassment, Earl's fire, the armed confrontation. "Jesus," Meredith breathed. "These people aren't playing around." "No, they're not." There was a long pause. Then Meredith made her decision. "I'm coming to Kentucky," she said, "with a camera crew and a security detail. We're going to document everything, interview everyone. And then we're going to put this story on national television." "When?" Marcus asked. 72 hours. Can you hold out that long?" Marcus looked out the window at the hills where his land waited. "I don't have a choice." The next 3 days were the longest of Marcus's life. Kane seemed to sense that something was coming. His lawyers filed a flurry of motions, seeking injunctions to prevent Marcus from removing anything from the property. His men increased their surveillance, parking at the end of the road 24 hours a day, and the county, suddenly compliant, sent inspectors to examine every inch of Marcus's trailer for code violations. Marcus weathered it all. He kept Jolene and Cody safe in the bunker. He rotated watches with Danny and Rosa. He documented every harassment, every threat, every suspicious vehicle. And he waited. On the morning of the 3rd day, he drove to the hospital to see Earl. The old sheriff was awake now, propped up in his bed, his face a patchwork of bandages and bruises. "You look terrible," Marcus said. Earl laughed, then winced. "Don't make me laugh. Hurts too much." Marcus sat in the chair beside the bed. "Earl, I'm sorry. This is my fault." Earl shook his head. "No, this is Kane's fault, and Thorne's, and all the people who spent decades getting rich off other people's suffering." He reached out and gripped Marcus's hand with surprising strength. "You finish this," Earl said. "You expose these bastards for what they are, and you don't apologize to anyone." Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "I will." Meredith Cole arrived that afternoon with 3 camera operators, a sound technician, and 4 private security guards. She was younger than Marcus expected, maybe 40, with sharp features and sharper eyes. She shook his hand firmly and got straight to business. "Show me everything," she said. Marcus led her team down into the bunker, watched their faces as they took in the scale of it. The storage rooms, the vault, the command center with its maps and documents. Meredith walked through the corridors in silence, her expression growing more intense with each new revelation. When they reached the vault, she stopped and stared at the stacked pallets of cash, the gold bars, the bearer bonds. "How much?" she whispered. $245 million, Marcus said, "give or take." Meredith turned to her camera crew. "Get everything, every room, every document, every dollar." They worked through the night, filming and cataloging. Marcus helped where he could, guiding them through the maze of corridors, explaining what he had learned from the documents. By dawn, they had enough footage to fill hours of broadcast time. "This is going to change everything," Meredith said as they climbed back to the surface. "When this airs, heads are going to roll, careers are going to end, people are going to prison." Marcus nodded. "That's the idea." But Meredith's expression was troubled. "You understand what this means for you, right? Once this story breaks, you're going to be the most famous man in America. And the most hated." Marcus looked at the hills, at the property he had bought for $800, at the land that had turned his life upside down. "I didn't ask for any of this," he said quietly, "but I'm not going to run from it either." Meredith studied him for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone angrier, more bitter, more broken." Marcus smiled faintly. "Oh, I'm broken. But I've learned that broken things can still be useful. Sometimes they're even stronger." That evening, as Meredith's team was packing up their equipment, Kane made his final move. The SUVs came up the road in force. Not 3 this time, but 6. They stopped at the gate, and men began pouring out. A dozen of them, maybe more, all armed, all professional. Kane stepped out of the lead vehicle, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was another man, older, distinguished, wearing the kind of suit that whispered power and privilege. Marcus recognized him from the photographs he had found in the bunker. Senator James Prescott. "Mr. Webb," Kane called out, "I believe you've met my associate." Marcus stood at the gate, Danny and Rosa beside him. Meredith's security guards fanned out behind them. The camera crew was still filming, capturing everything. "Senator," Marcus said, "didn't expect to see you in Kentucky." Prescott's smile was cold. "I make a point of visiting my friends when they're in trouble, and Mr. Kane is a very good friend." The senator stepped forward, his voice dropping to something almost reasonable. "Mr. Webb, I understand you've found something that belongs to certain people. Powerful people who would prefer their private affairs remain private. Now, I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone." Marcus shook his head. "I don't think we can, Senator." Prescott's smile vanished. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. I've destroyed men far more powerful than you. Generals, congressmen, journalists who thought they could expose secrets better left buried." He gestured at Meredith. "Your little news story will never air. I have friends at every network, every newspaper, every social media platform. One phone call, and this all goes away." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. "Rosa," he said, "is the uplink working?" Rosa checked her tablet. "Live to 7 different servers, streaming to 12 countries. We've got about 50,000 viewers and climbing." Prescott's face went pale. "What?" Marcus held up the device. It was a small camera, no bigger than a button, wirelessly connected to Rosa's broadcasting setup. "I learned something in the army," Marcus said. "Always have a backup plan." He stepped closer to the gate, close enough to see the fear dawning in Prescott's eyes. "Your secrets aren't secret anymore, Senator. The world is watching, and by tomorrow morning, everyone is going to know exactly what you and Kane and your fathers did." Prescott lunged for the gate, but his security held him back. Kane was already retreating toward his vehicle, his face a mask of fury. "This isn't over," Kane snarled. "You have no idea what you've started." Marcus watched them go, watched the convoy disappear down the road. Then he turned to Meredith, who was staring at him with something like awe. "Did you get all that?" he asked. She nodded slowly, every word. Marcus looked at the hills one more time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere below his feet, $245 million sat in the darkness, waiting. But the money didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the truth. What mattered was that powerful men could no longer hide behind their wealth and their connections. What mattered was that a one-legged veteran from a dying coal town had stood up and said no. Marcus Webb had come home from war broken and lost. But standing here now, surrounded by people who believed in him, fighting for something bigger than himself, he finally felt whole again. The battle for Ridgecrest wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for the first time, Marcus knew they had a chance. And that was enough. The story broke like a thunderclap across the nation. Meredith Cole's report aired on every major network within 24 hours of the confrontation at Marcus's gate. The footage was damning. Senator James Prescott threatening a disabled veteran on camera. Victor Kane's armed men surrounding a private residence, and the documents, hundreds of pages of evidence showing decades of fraud, theft, and corruption at the highest levels of government. Marcus watched the broadcast from the bunker, Jolene and Cody beside him, Danny and Rosa monitoring communications from the command center. On the screen, Meredith walked through the underground corridors, her voice steady as she explained what had been hidden beneath the Kentucky hills for over 30 years. $245 million, she said. Stolen from American taxpayers, hidden by men who believed they were untouchable, and discovered by a wounded veteran who refused to be silenced. Cody tugged at Marcus's sleeve. "Uncle Marcus, is that you? Are you on TV?" Marcus nodded, still not quite believing it himself. "Yeah, buddy, that's me." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the FBI announced an investigation into Kane Properties and its connections to government officials. Senator Prescott issued a statement denying any wrongdoing, but the denials rang hollow against the footage of his threats. Social media exploded with hashtags and trending topics, and Marcus's name became synonymous with courage, integrity, and the kind of stubborn American defiance that people wanted to believe still existed. But Kane wasn't finished. Not yet. The attack came at 3 in the morning, 2 days after the broadcast. Marcus was asleep in the bunker when Rosa's voice crackled over the intercom. Multiple vehicles approaching from the south, at least 20 men. "They're not stopping at the perimeter." He was on his feet in seconds, rifle in hand, prosthetic leg already strapped on. Danny appeared beside him, eyes sharp despite the hour. "This is it," Danny said. "Kane's making his last stand." Marcus nodded. "Get Jolene and Cody to the safe room. Seal them in." "What about you?" Marcus checked his magazine. "I'm going to remind Kane why he should have left us alone." The bunker had been built to withstand a nuclear attack. Its ventilation systems could filter out radiation. Its walls could absorb a direct hit from a conventional bomb. And its layout, with narrow corridors and multiple choke points, was a defender's dream. Marcus had spent weeks studying every inch of it. He knew where to set ambushes. He knew where to fall back. He knew how to use the darkness and the concrete to multiply his advantages. Kane's men didn't know any of that. They came in like they were raiding a civilian home, confident in their numbers and their firepower. They didn't expect resistance. They certainly didn't expect a combat engineer who had spent 2 tours fighting in tunnels and caves half a world away. The first wave hit the main entrance. Marcus let them come, watching on the security monitors as they descended the ladder and spread out into the corridors. 6 men, professional, well-equipped. He waited until they reached the first junction, then triggered the emergency lockdown. Steel doors slammed shut throughout the complex, cutting the intruders off from each other, trapping them in sections they didn't understand. Then he went hunting. It wasn't a fair fight. Marcus didn't want a fair fight. He wanted to send a message. He took them down one by one, using the darkness and the maze of corridors to his advantage. Some he disarmed. Some he incapacitated. One he simply scared so badly the man dropped his weapon and ran for the exit, screaming about ghosts in the walls. Danny handled the second wave at the surface, using the defensive positions they had prepared to pin down Kane's reinforcements. Rosa coordinated from the command center, directing their movements, tracking the enemy, keeping communication lines open. By dawn, it was over. 14 of Kane's men were zip-tied and groaning in various parts of the bunker. 3 more had fled into the woods, and Kane himself was nowhere to be found. But the real victory came an hour later, when the first helicopters appeared on the horizon. Marcus climbed out of the bunker just as 3 Black Hawks touched down in the clearing. Men in tactical gear poured out, fanning across the property with weapons raised. But these weren't Kane's mercenaries. They were FBI. "Marcus Webb," the lead agent called out, approaching with his hands visible. "I'm Special Agent Thomas Riley. We're here to secure the site." Marcus lowered his rifle. "Took you long enough?" Riley almost smiled. "Yeah, well, bureaucracy. You understand." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Federal agents swarmed the property, documenting everything, securing the bunker, taking statements from Marcus and his team. The men Kane had sent were loaded into transport vehicles and hauled away for questioning. And then, just before noon, another convoy arrived. But this one wasn't carrying soldiers. It was carrying suits. Marcus recognized the lead figure immediately from the news broadcasts. Attorney General Patricia Vance, the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the country. She stepped out of her vehicle and walked toward him with the measured stride of someone who had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. "Mr. Webb," she said, extending her hand. "On behalf of the United States government, I want to thank you for your service." Again. Marcus shook her hand. "Just doing what needed to be done." Vance nodded. "That's what they told me you'd say." She looked around at the chaos of the scene, the agents and the vehicles and the endless activity. "You've uncovered one of the largest fraud cases in American history. The documents in that bunker implicate dozens of government officials, contractors, and corporate executives. This is going to take years to fully prosecute." Marcus thought about all the names he had seen in those files. The senators and generals and businessmen who had enriched themselves while ordinary people struggled. "Good," he said simply. Vance studied him for a moment. "There's something else we need to discuss. The money." Marcus had known this was coming. $245 million in stolen government funds. Whatever his moral claim to it might be, legally it belonged to the people it had been stolen from. "I know," he said, "it's not mine." Vance tilted her head. "Technically, no. But here's the situation. Most of the original victims are dead. The statute of limitations on the underlying crimes has long since expired, and the cost of tracking down every legitimate claimant would exceed the value of the recovery itself." She paused. "So we have some discretion in how those funds are allocated." Marcus waited. "I've spoken with the president," Vance continued, "and we'd like to make you a proposal. The government will claim the bulk of the recovered assets, but we're prepared to designate a significant portion for specific purposes, purposes you would have input on." "What kind of purposes?" Vance smiled. "Veterans programs, community development, things that would benefit people like you, Mr. Webb. People who have given everything for their country and received little in return." Marcus stared at her. "You're serious?" "Completely. The president believes that how we handle this case will send a message about what America values. And he wants that message to be clear." She pulled a document from her briefcase. "We're proposing a $40 million allocation for a veterans rehabilitation center to be built on this property. State-of-the-art facilities, mental health services, job training, housing assistance, everything we should have been providing all along." Marcus took the document, his hands trembling slightly. $40 million. More than he could have ever imagined. "And," Vance added, "we'd like you to be involved in its development, not just as a figurehead, but as a genuine partner, someone who understands what veterans need because he's lived it." Marcus looked at the property around him, the hills where his land stretched toward the horizon, the bunker entrance where so much had changed, the place that had seemed cursed to everyone else but had given him a second chance. "Why me?" he asked quietly. Vance's expression softened. "Because you didn't give up. Because when powerful people tried to silence you, you stood your ground. Because you showed the country what courage looks like." She paused. "And because, frankly, we need more people like you. People who believe that doing the right thing still matters." Marcus looked at the document again, at the plans for a center that would help veterans like him find their way back from the darkness. "Okay," he said, "let's do it. What happens next will transform not just Marcus's life, but an entire community that had lost hope. Stay tuned to see how this story ends. If you're enjoying the journey, please like, share, and subscribe for more." The news of Kane's arrest broke 3 days later. Federal agents had tracked him to a private airfield outside Lexington, where he was attempting to board a chartered jet to the Cayman Islands. The footage of him being led away in handcuffs played on every channel, his silver hair disheveled, his expensive suit rumpled, his face a mask of disbelief. Senator Prescott followed shortly after. His resignation was announced the same day the Justice Department unsealed the indictments against him. 37 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The press conference was brief. The senator made no statement. His lawyer did all the talking. And in Ridgecrest, Kentucky, something unexpected began to happen. People started showing up. At first it was just a few. Veterans from neighboring counties who had seen the news and wanted to shake Marcus's hand. Journalists looking for follow-up stories. Curiosity seekers hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous bunker. But then it became something more. Families arrived with stories of their own. Parents who had lost sons and daughters to wars that seemed to have no end. Veterans struggling with PTSD and addiction and the crushing weight of memories they couldn't escape. People who had been forgotten by a system that was supposed to protect them. They came to Marcus because he had stood up, because he had fought back, because he had shown them that it was still possible to win. Marcus didn't know what to do with all of them. He wasn't a counselor or a social worker or a politician. He was just a man with a prosthetic leg and a piece of land that happened to hide a fortune. But he listened. That was the one thing he could do. He sat with them on his trailer steps or in the shade of the oak trees, and he listened to their stories, their pain, their hopes, their fears. And slowly, something began to take shape. Not just a building, but a community. Not just a program, but a movement. The construction started in the spring. Heavy equipment rolled up the dirt road that had once been traveled only by Marcus's beat-up truck. Crews from across the state arrived to break ground on what would become the Webb Veterans Center. The name had been Jolene's idea. Marcus had resisted at first, uncomfortable with the attention, but she had insisted. "You earned this," she told him. "Let people know who they're honoring." The design was unlike anything else in the region. The main building would sit above ground, a modern facility with meeting rooms, counseling offices, dormitories for transitional housing, and a cafeteria that would serve hot meals to anyone who needed them. But beneath it, preserved and restored, the bunker would remain. Not as a vault anymore, as a museum. The stolen money had been removed by federal agents, catalogued and processed, and eventually distributed according to the government's recovery protocols. But the bunker itself, with its Cold War architecture and its hidden history, would be maintained as a reminder. A reminder of what greed and corruption could accomplish, and a reminder of what happened when ordinary people refused to look away. Marcus threw himself into the work. He was there every day, watching the progress, consulting with architects and contractors, making sure that every decision reflected the needs of the veterans they would serve. Danny stayed to help, finding purpose in the construction the same way he had found it in combat. Rosa returned to her security work but called weekly, checking in, offering advice, reminding Marcus that he wasn't alone. And Earl recovered. The old sheriff was released from the hospital after 6 weeks of treatment. His cabin was gone, but Marcus had already arranged for a new one to be built on the edge of his property. When Earl protested, Marcus just shook his head. "You stood by me when no one else would," Marcus said. "This is the least I can do." Earl moved in as soon as the walls were up. He spent his days supervising the younger workers, sharing stories about the old days, and keeping an eye on things with the sharp attention of a man who had spent his life watching for trouble. By summer, the center's framework was complete. The walls rose against the Kentucky sky, solid and strong, a testament to what could be built when people worked together. And as the building took shape, so did the community around it. Ridgecrest began to change. The attention brought by Marcus's story had drawn investment to the dying town. New businesses opened on Main Street. The old diner reopened under new management. Young families started moving in, attracted by the jobs and the sense of possibility that had been missing for so long. It wasn't a miracle. The town still had problems: poverty, unemployment, the lingering effects of decades of decline. But for the first time in years, people were talking about the future instead of the past. They were planting gardens and fixing porches and painting fences. They were believing again. And at the center of it all was Marcus Webb. He hadn't asked for any of it, hadn't wanted to be a symbol or a leader or a hero, but the role had found him anyway, the way important things sometimes do when you stop running from them. One evening in late August, as the sun was setting over the hills, Marcus sat on the steps of his trailer watching the construction crews pack up for the night. Cody was beside him, drawing pictures in a notebook, his tongue poking out in concentration. "Uncle Marcus," Cody said without looking up, "are you happy?" Marcus considered the question. A year ago, he wouldn't have known how to answer. Happiness had seemed like something that belonged to other people, something he had forfeited when the Ide took his leg and the war took everything else. But now, sitting here with his nephew, watching the building rise against the darkening sky, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Contentment, peace, hope. "Yeah, buddy," he said quietly, "I think I am." Cody nodded, satisfied with the answer, and went back to his drawing. Marcus smiled and looked toward the horizon, where the first stars were beginning to appear. The grand opening was scheduled for November 11th, Veterans Day. Marcus had insisted on the date, and no one had argued. The morning dawned cold and clear, the kind of autumn day that made the hills glow with color. Cars began arriving before sunrise, filling the new parking lot and spilling onto the road. By 9 o'clock, over 500 people had gathered in front of the main building, their breath misting in the crisp air. Marcus stood at the entrance, wearing a suit for the first time in years. It didn't fit quite right, and the tie felt like a noose around his neck, but Jolene had insisted. "You're giving a speech," she had told him. "You need to look the part." Beside him stood Danny and Rosa, Earl and Jolene and Cody, and a dozen other people who had become family over the past year. Behind them, the Webb Veterans Center rose in all its completed glory, its windows gleaming in the morning light. A platform had been set up in front of the building with chairs for dignitaries and a podium decorated with flags. Attorney General Vance was there, along with the governor of Kentucky, several congressmen, and more military brass than Marcus had ever seen in one place. But the people who mattered most weren't on the platform. They were in the crowd, veterans in worn jackets and faded caps, families who had lost loved ones to wars that seemed to have no end, people from Ridgecrest who had watched their town dying and were now watching it come back to life. The ceremony began with the national anthem, sung by a local choir that had been practicing for months. Then came the speeches one after another, each one praising Marcus's courage and sacrifice and determination. Marcus barely heard any of it. His mind was somewhere else. Thinking about his father, who had worked himself to death in a hardware store, thinking about his mother, who had spent her last years alone, thinking about the men he had served with, the ones who didn't come home, the ones whose names were engraved on his heart, And then it was his turn. He approached the podium slowly, the prosthetic leg clicking softly against the wooden platform. The crowd fell silent. Marcus looked out at the sea of faces, at the people who had come to witness this moment, and felt his throat tighten. He had written a speech. Jolene had helped him with it, polishing the words, making sure he said the right things. But standing there now, looking at the veterans in the crowd, at the families who had lost so much, at the community that had rallied around him, the prepared words seemed inadequate. So he spoke from the heart instead. "A year ago," he began, his voice rough, "I came home from war with nothing, no job, no savings, no purpose. I had lost my leg to an ID, and I was pretty sure I had lost my soul somewhere along the way too." The crowd was utterly still. "I bought this land because it was cheap, because nobody else wanted it, because I thought maybe out here in the hills I could figure out who I was supposed to be now that the war was over." He paused, gathering himself. "What I found instead was something I never expected, a bunker full of secrets, a fortune that didn't belong to me, and a fight I didn't ask for but couldn't walk away from." He looked at the building behind him. "This center isn't about me. It's about all of us. Every veteran who came home broken, every family that lost someone they loved, every community that got left behind while the world moved on without them." His voice strengthened. "We built this place together, not just with money and materials, but with faith. Faith that things could be different. Faith that if we stood together, we could make something better. Faith that the sacrifices we made actually meant something." He turned back to the crowd. "I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if this center will change the world or just help a few people find their way back from the darkness. But I know this. Every veteran who walks through these doors will know they're not alone. Every family that comes here will know their loved one's service mattered. Every person who needs help will find it." He took a deep breath. "Because that's what we do. We don't give up. We don't walk away. We fight for each other, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Marcus looked at the crowd one more time, at the faces watching him with tears and hope and something that looked like pride. "This building is named after me," he said quietly, "but it belongs to all of you, to everyone who ever wore a uniform, to everyone who ever waited at home for someone who might not come back, to everyone who ever believed that service and sacrifice still mean something in this country." He straightened, his voice rising. "Welcome to the Webb Veterans Center. Welcome home." The applause that followed was deafening. Marcus stood at the podium, letting it wash over him, feeling for the first time that maybe, just maybe, he had earned it. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was brief. Marcus held the oversized scissors while Cody helped him squeeze the handles. The red ribbon fell away, and the doors of the center swung open. The crowd surged forward, eager to see what had been built. Marcus stepped back, watching them pour inside, their faces full of wonder and hope. Jolene appeared beside him, her eyes wet. "You did it," she said. Marcus shook his head. "We did it, all of us." She hugged him tightly. "Dad would be so proud of you." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, a wound he had been carrying for years, finally beginning to heal. "I hope so." The rest of the day passed in a blur of handshakes and photographs and conversations that Marcus would barely remember later. But one moment stood out, sharp and clear. It was late afternoon when Marcus finally found a quiet corner to rest. His leg was aching, and the emotional weight of the day had left him exhausted. He was sitting on a bench near the entrance to the Bunker Museum when a man approached. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with the lean build and watchful eyes of someone who had seen combat. His left arm ended just below the elbow, the sleeve of his jacket pinned neatly in place. "Mr. Webb?" the young man said hesitantly. "I'm sorry to bother you." Marcus straightened. "You're not bothering me. What's your name?" "Tyler. Tyler Mason. I served with the 82nd Airborne. Lost my arm to a rocket attack in Syria 2 years ago. Marcus nodded. Pull up a seat, Tyler. Tyler sat beside him, his remaining hand fidgeting nervously. I saw your story on the news, read everything I could find about what you did. And I wanted to tell you something. Marcus waited. When I came home, Tyler continued, his voice cracking, I wanted to die, every day. I couldn't see the point of anything. I was broken and I didn't think anyone could understand. He looked at Marcus, his eyes bright with tears. But then I saw you, standing up to those people, refusing to give in, and I thought, if he can do that, maybe I can too. Maybe I'm not as broken as I thought. Marcus felt his own eyes stinging. Tyler, I'm not saying I'm fixed, Tyler said quickly. I know it doesn't work like that, but for the first time since I got hurt, I believe it's possible, and that's because of you. He stood, wiping his face with his sleeve. So thank you, Mr. Webb. Thank you for showing me that broken doesn't mean finished. Before Marcus could respond, Tyler walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Marcus sat alone on the bench, the young man's words echoing in his mind. Broken doesn't mean finished. He had come home from war believing exactly the opposite, believing that the damage was permanent, that the best he could hope for was survival. But Tyler was right. Broken didn't mean finished. It meant different. It meant finding new ways to be strong. It meant building something from the pieces that remained. Marcus stood slowly, his prosthetic leg solid beneath him, and walked back toward the center, toward the future he was helping to create, toward the life he had finally allowed himself to want. The months that followed were busy ones. The Webb Veterans Center opened its doors to anyone who needed help. In the first year, over 2,000 veterans passed through its programs. Some stayed for a few days, some stayed for months. All of them left better than they arrived. Marcus was there every day, not as an administrator or a figurehead, but as a presence. He ate meals in the cafeteria with the residents. He sat in on support group sessions. He walked the grounds in the early morning, when the mist hung low over the hills and the world felt peaceful. He became what he had never expected to be, a mentor, a guide, a steady hand for people who had lost their way. Danny stayed too, running the center's physical rehabilitation program with the same dedication he had brought to saving lives on the battlefield. Rosa consulted on security and eventually started a job training program for veterans interested in the field. Earl served as the unofficial grandfather of the operation, dispensing wisdom and bad jokes in equal measure. And Jolene and Cody moved to Ridgecrest permanently. They found a house just down the road from the center, a small place with a big yard and a view of the hills. Cody enrolled in the local school and quickly became popular, telling everyone about his uncle, the war hero, who had found a secret bunker full of treasure. Marcus visited them every Sunday for dinner. It became the highlight of his week, sitting at their kitchen table, eating Jolene's meatloaf, listening to Cody chatter about school and friends and all the things that made up a normal childhood. On one of those evenings, about a year after the center opened, Cody asked a question that stopped Marcus cold. "Uncle Marcus," he said, "did you ever think you would be happy again?" Marcus looked at his nephew, at the innocent face still untouched by the kind of pain he himself had known. Then he looked at Jolene, at the home she had built, at the life they had created together. "No," he admitted. "I didn't." Cody frowned. "But you are happy now, right?" Marcus smiled. "Yeah, buddy, I am. What changed?" Marcus thought about the question. Really thought about it. "I found people worth fighting for," he finally said. "And I let them fight for me too." Cody seemed satisfied with that answer. He went back to his dinner, already planning his next adventure. But Jolene caught Marcus's eye across the table, and in her gaze he saw understanding, gratitude, love. After dinner, Marcus stepped onto the porch to watch the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple. the hills glowing golden in the fading light. He thought about everything that had led him here, the Eid that took his leg, the war that took his friends, the homecoming that had felt like dying all over again, the land auction that had seemed like a desperate gamble, and the bunker, the fortune, the fight that had given him back his purpose. He had started with nothing, less than nothing. He had been a broken man in a broken town, surrounded by people who had given up on themselves and on each other. But he hadn't given up, even when it hurt, even when it seemed hopeless, even when the darkness pressed in so close he couldn't see a way out, and because he kept fighting, everything had changed. The door opened behind him. Jolene stepped out, wrapping a sweater around her shoulders against the evening chill. "You okay?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how different things could have been. About how close I came to giving up." Jolene moved to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "But you didn't," she said. "No, I didn't." She took his hand, her fingers warm against his scarred skin. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "Dad would be proud of you too." Marcus felt the familiar ache in his chest, but it was different now. Not the sharp pain of grief, but the gentle sorrow of memory. His father had died working a job he hated, trying to provide for a family he loved. His mother had died alone, wondering if her son would ever come home. He couldn't change the past, couldn't undo the mistakes or heal the wounds that had scarred his family for generations. But he could honor their memory by building something that mattered, by helping people who needed it, by being the man they had always believed he could be. Marcus squeezed Jolene's hand. "Let's go inside," he said. "It's getting cold." They walked back into the warmth together, leaving the sunset to fade in peace. 2 years later, Marcus stood at the entrance of the Webb Veterans Center, watching a new group of residents arrive. They came in vans and buses and private cars, men and women of all ages, all backgrounds, all branches of service. Some walked on their own, some needed help. All of them carried the invisible weight of experiences that civilians would never understand. Marcus greeted each one personally, shook their hands, looked them in the eye, welcomed them home. Because that was what this place was. Not just a facility, not just a program, a home, a family, a community of people who understood what it meant to serve and sacrifice and survive. The center had grown since its opening. New buildings had been added, new programs developed. The Bunker Museum had become a destination for history buffs and school groups, its Cold War artifacts and corruption exhibits drawing visitors from across the country. But the mission remained the same, helping veterans find their way back, showing them that broken didn't mean finished, proving that there was always hope, even when hope seemed impossible. Marcus was 53 now. His hair had gone grey at the temples. His prosthetic leg had been upgraded twice. The nightmares still came sometimes, but they were quieter now, less frequent. And every morning, when he woke up and looked out at the hills where everything had started, he felt grateful. Not just for the fortune he had found, but for the purpose it had given him, the family it had brought together, the lives it had touched. The last visitor of the day was a woman in her 60s, silver-haired and straight-backed, wearing a gold star pin on her lapel. She approached Marcus with a hesitant smile. "Mr. Webb," she said, "I'm Margaret. My son served in Afghanistan. He didn't come home." Marcus nodded, his heart heavy with recognition. "I'm sorry for your loss." Margaret's eyes glistened. "I wanted to thank you for building this place, for giving families like mine somewhere to go, somewhere to remember." She pressed something into his hand. A photograph. A young man in uniform, smiling at the camera, his whole life ahead of him. His name was David, Margaret said. He believed in what he was fighting for, and I think he would have believed in what you're doing here. Marcus looked at the photograph, at the face of another young soldier who had given everything. "I'll make sure his name is remembered," Marcus said quietly. "I promise." Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. Then she hugged him, a stranger embracing a stranger, united by loss and hope and the unbreakable bonds of service. After she left, Marcus walked to the memorial wall at the center of the complex. It was a curved stone structure engraved with the names of fallen soldiers from the region. David's name would be added soon, joining hundreds of others who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Marcus stood before the wall, the photograph still in his hand, and thought about all the names he carried in his heart. His brothers in arms, his father and mother, the veterans he had helped and the ones he couldn't save. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the pain and the loss and the moments when giving up had seemed like the only option. And he thought about the choice he had made, to keep fighting, to keep believing, to build something from the wreckage of his life. Because that was what soldiers did. They didn't quit. They didn't surrender. They found a way forward, even when the path was unclear. Marcus placed his hand on the cool stone of the memorial wall. "Thank you," he whispered. "All of you, for showing me what courage really means." The sun was setting over the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Marcus stood alone for a moment longer, then turned and walked back toward the center, toward the future he had built, toward the life he had earned, toward home. Anyone can rebuild from nothing if they're brave enough to believe that broken doesn't mean finished. As twilight settled over the Kentucky hills, Marcus Webb looked at the plaque above the entrance of the center that bore his name. The words engraved there said everything that mattered, built by those who were left with nothing, for those who gave everything. He had come home from war believing his life was over. He had found a fortune buried in the darkness and enemies who wanted to destroy him. He had fought battles that most people would never understand. And in the end, he had discovered something more valuable than $245 million. He had discovered that purpose doesn't come from what you have. It comes from what you give. Because for Marcus, and for all the veterans who would walk through those doors in the years to come, the greatest victory wasn't winning a fight. It was finding a reason to keep fighting. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep the journey going. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that heroes aren't born. They're made, one choice at a time.